it helps to get us grounded. I don't know about you, but for a lot of men nowadays, we live so much in our heads all the time, and we're so busy thinking all the time, and we're so busy, living in virtual reality that we very often forget that we have bodies, until, we try to sit up straight, having been hunched over the computer for hours, and we realize that, our back cracks from our necks to our tailbone, and that we're stiff and we can't move anymore. There's a real sense of loss of physicality. And one of the genuine fundamental marks of masculinity is our physicality.
I'm Paul, founder of Manifesto. CORE is our online mastermind network, and this video is recorded live during our weekly community meeting. If you like it, then subscribe and check out our website if you'd like to join the next community meeting held every Friday. Welcome, everybody, to our first public discussion on the review of the Manifesto 10 Principles. I'm really excited about the opportunity to use this to kind of go deeper and understand better how we are an organization, what we're trying to do together, what our goals are, what our visions are, what our values are, our beliefs. And I think this is really a bigger part of many organizations that we're working together with to strengthen men's work in Europe, to take up the challenge that we're facing at the moment, all of us, I think, which is that the state of manhood and masculinity needs a bit of a lift. And so that's what we want to do. And so the best way we've done that, we have 10 principles at the moment. Some of them we've found is to challenge the idea, but to respect the man. And that's what I think what I want to put a highlight on. We also talk a lot about masculine communication. So we want to have direct, open, honest conversations about difficult topics, and we want to do so in a constructive way where we're building things up in love at the same time as well. So this isn't about like dominating each other with our ideas and impressing other people with how much we know about stuff, but hopefully about finding shared understanding through the conversations, and moving towards a constructive conversation where we can actually be transforming men's lives individually in the work that we're doing. So I've put together a couple of shares. The meeting's going to go like this, that I'm going to start off with, it'll probably take about 10 minutes presentation. And then we're going to have David Rice, who is a long-term Zen practitioner, who is going to also talk about meditation and contemplation from his experience and perspective, and specifically also leading one of our Manifesto core groups. That's part of his perspective as well. And then Father Michael Butler is an Orthodox priest. He's also going to take 10-15 minutes to present. After that, I'm going to hear if there are any of the core team leaders who have something that they would like to share based on the discussion. If they have comments or questions or issues that they'd like to bring up. Then I'm going to ask if there are any core members who would like to do that. And then lastly, we're going to open up for everybody else. And we really want to take some time to then go off into breakout rooms after that as well. So we're going to have small conversations where everybody can come to word. So we're looking really to involve everybody as much as possible. So the comments and questions at the end will be short because we still want to come back after the breakouts, summarize, and this is going to be a start of this conversation. So great. Anything that anybody wants to say or mention before I dive into my presentation? Good to see Peter as well over from Czech Republic. Good to see you guys. Great. I'm going to share my screen here. And here it is. Yes, we have chosen the title for this initiative, Know Thyself. Of course, this was the famous words at the top of the temple for the Temple of Apollo in Athens. But I think it's been taken up by a broad variety of people. And it's something that we've realized increasingly in Manifesto, that's something we need to take very, very seriously. Because as a man, if we want to know how to be in the world, what we're supposed to be doing, we need to first of all know who am I and where am I going. Sometimes it also helps to know where am I coming from as well. That's part of it. But that's what we found is knowing thyself through a personal practice that you have implemented every day. We've increasingly been gathering around this idea that this is a very, very good idea for men to be doing this. And so we want to be putting as strong a message out there as possible about our enthusiasm about it. And many of the groups have been talking about, well, making this a something that they think that all of the men should be doing, and doing in an aligned way as possible as well. So I'm going to first of all just say, yeah, the purpose of this meeting, and this is maybe also for my presentation, but we want to introduce this idea of mandatory practice. We want to underline the benefits of doing these kinds of practices. I won't spend a long time doing that. I think most of you guys are here because you already know of these benefits, but I want to give a kind of what's Manifesto's perspective on this. And then maybe the core of what I want to do today, and it might even get a little bit, advanced, but I want to try and raise our insights and begin to build a shared understanding and language for talking about these kind of practices. Because I think a lot of us, we have sometimes very superficial understanding. I know when just 5 years ago, I had an incredibly superficial understanding of what meditation and contemplation was about. And I think that'll be the kind of starting point for them to starting to ask questions about, like, why are we doing this? How are we going to do it? And what is it we're actually going to do? Which I think is the core issue that we're looking at. So this is the context that we're operating in. At least this is the context that I think is very relevant for why this is an important practice. It's primarily one of distraction. There are incredibly talented people, the most educated and the smartest mathematicians and engineers and psychologists sitting, working very, very hard every single day to figure out how to grab your attention and turn you into an atomized, individualized consumer who will, put your attention into their product of whatever it is. And most of us, myself included, lose this battle for my own attention every single day. I'm here to say I am not the master of my own attention. A lot of the time, my attention is a slave to all kinds of other algorithms and systems that are monopolizing it and using it in ways that I don't think are very productive. And I try and fight for my attention. I have a daily practice, and it fortifies me and strengthens me every day. And without that, I think I would be completely lost. So I think that's at least the context that I'm looking at this problem with. And I think it's getting more and more. And so the problem is escalating as well. The issue that we're looking at in Manifesto, this is the primary thing, is what I would say confusion about manhood and masculinity. I just had an advert popping up on my screen with an image very similar to the one in the top left-hand corner here, with a kind of man that's half man, half very feminine woman. And the question was, does this picture make you feel slightly uncomfortable? Well, then you must be transphobic. And so we're getting bombarded with a whole lot of these kinds of ideas and images these days, and men are having an increasingly difficult time in figuring out how to react and what to do about all these different things, and how to orientate themselves with the different images that we're getting presented for online. So that's something that I think, again, disconnecting and going down into a contemplative practice and a meditative practice is a very good answer to dealing with that. So that's why I have this solution here. And you'll notice I have two quite different pictures here. The one of them indicates being on the top of a mountain and looking out over a large area. And the other picture is looking down into a microscope. And I'm going to go a little bit more into why I have exactly those two perspectives in this picture here, and why I think that's important. And it's kind of framing so far all the discussions that we've been having here in Manifesto about what it is that we're doing. I know there are many other images and metaphors that can be used for this kind of practices as well. The benefits that I want to talk about shortly from our perspective, and I put a picture there in the middle that was taken at the death of the patriarchs this year. You can see it's the team that both David is on here on Manifesto Core. My dad is the guy over on the right-hand side. He's also on that team, but it's a core group of guys that have been meeting for quite a long time, and they're sharing a kind of spiritual practice together. And I think what we really look at is not just the kind of atomized, individualistic spiritual practices that can kind of actually be supporting the capitalist machine to continue, but actually ones that are bringing people together in a sense of connectedness, in a fellowship of other people. And then the pictures that I have around there, I picked them a little bit, just through inspiration, but there's something about seeing the stars and seeing upwards and connecting to how amazing existence is, and being on that journey of that boat. I really like that. There's something about a peak of the transcendent, something that goes upwards, that we look towards. I really like the picture of the guy exploring a ruin with a flame and kind of looking through the dark recesses of an abandoned building. And then there's also something that I think often gets forgotten in conversations with men and masculinity, which I tried to get with that sunrise there. And that's just the experience of beauty. I think truth, love, and beauty are absolutely core aspects of work that we need to be considering as well. So that's just some inspirational points from me. So that I wanted to bring into the benefits of this. I can see the time's moving, so I was going to play a little video from Jonathan Peugeot talking about why he thinks that this kind of practice is really important, but I'm actually going to skip over it because I'm seeing the time here. So I'm going to put up these slides afterwards, and you guys can, of course, watch them if you want. If anybody knows me well, you know that my two main inspirations is two guys who are kind of in the wake of Jordan Peterson. It's Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke. Jonathan Peugeot is an Orthodox Christian. John Vervaeke is a practicing Buddhist, and he's also a professor at the University of Toronto and teaches in psychology. And I'm going to play a little video from him here, which is from a series that he put together called Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's a 52 episode series, I think. I'm not all the way through, but episode 9 is on insight. And there was an idea that he presented there that really captured this idea that I mentioned to you guys before about kind of two different approaches to meditation and contemplation, and really using these two words. So this is the part where I want to kind of get into trying to building a shared understanding of this practice. And so I'm going to play this little 2-minute clip for you guys here. And then afterwards, I'm actually going to, it's kind of like the conclusion, and I'm going to go a little bit into the details of it afterwards before I finish up.
Reasons, but I don't have time to go into it right now, right? Normally, we don't pay attention so much to our sensations, we pay attention through our sensations to the world, right? So normally I'm not paying attention to my feelings, I'm paying attention through my feelings to the cup. In meditation, I'm stepping back and not looking through my sensations, I'm stepping back and looking at them, right? That's like, I don't look through the way my mind is framing things, I'm looking at the framing. I also do something else. I don't just look at it as one blob. I do something like observational analysis. I break the gestalt up into separate experiences. I'm doing this. I'm stepping back and looking at, and I'm breaking the gestalt of my experience up into its features, its atomic features, if you'll allow me a metaphor that you shouldn't push too far. That's what you do in meditation. And we'll talk about why would you do this? Why would that matter? And importantly, our question is, why would that help cause insight? So that's meditation. That's Vipassana, for example. I also teach my students a contemplative practice. So the word meditation means to move towards the center, and that fits perfectly with Vipassana and this kind of thing. Contemplation. Now, it bespeaks how overly simplified the West is in trying to understand this, in that these terms are now treated as synonyms. Contemplative practices, meditative practices, it's all the same thing. Aren't these just synonyms? They're not synonyms. And paying attention to their etymology will quickly reveal this. First of all, the Latin etymology. Look, what's in the center of this is temple. It comes from a temple, which actually comes from the Latin word for a part of the sky that you look up to see the signs from the gods. To contemplate is to look up towards the divine. This also goes well and is convergent with the contemplatio. The Latin term was a translation of this Greek word, theoria. And theoria also originally doesn't mean generating a theory. A theory is a species of theoria, because what I do with theoria is I try to see more deeply into reality. Do you see? Meditation is moving this way, and contemplation is moving that way. Meditation emphasizes scaling down, contemplation emphasizes scaling up. And I was taught both. In fact, I was taught 3 things in an integrated fashion. I was taught Vipassana, a scaling down strategy. I was taught Metta, a scaling up.
So that's as much as I'm going to play of that video there, guys. So if you want to see it, you can, as I said, you'll be able to watch the whole video. I recommend watching the entire video if you're interested in understanding more. But I'm going to just pull out a couple of the elements that John was talking about there in detail, just to help to create a better understanding there. I'm going to do it fairly quickly because time is moving. But basically, he spoke about, on this graph, you have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. And the horizontal axis, what we'll talk about first, is this idea of opacity versus transparency. And so the idea is that you can, in his example, then he took a pen and he used a pen to tap on an object. And in doing that, you could notice that you could move your attention to trying to explore the object that you're tapping on through the pen and through your fingers, obviously, as well, and then ultimately understanding the object, doing it with your eyes closed even as well. That helped you to kind of really focus on using your feeling sensation to feel out the object. Then you could also then move your attention back into just experiencing the pen while you continue tapping, but understanding and kind of being inside the pen. And then you could even go further back and go back into your fingers and experience the sensations in your fingers as you were tapping. And so this process of moving backwards, he calls opacity. That means like allowing the things that you're feeling through to become more opaque, so you're looking at them. And then transparency is moving further out into the world. And so we can do this automatically without really thinking about it in our experience of the world, in order to reach further and deeper out into the world, or to pull back and to be more aware of ourselves and what we're doing in it. The second aspect that he mentioned is he used this example of a simple little text box. Can someone read up for me what it says in this box here?
The cat.
Yes, it says the cat, except the point is that with it is that you'll notice that the middle letter in the two words is exactly the same. And I think that was Bolo's voice I heard, which translated here he read it as an H and here he read it as an A. And so the question is, it's a little bit of a thought experiment, but the point is basically like the cat is kind of like a gestalt that we all recognize and we understand intuitively when we see it. But the features are also important, and we need to be able to understand meaning. We both need to understand the individual features of the letters, but we also need to understand the gestalt. And clinical psychologists will tell you that we don't do one of these first and then the other, but we continuously move between the one and the other. And it's a dynamic process, and it's essential for understanding meaning in the world. And so this is about understanding the basic patterns of existence, at the same time being able to move down into the features of things as well. And so the point of all of this is that we need to, there's a story, I think it's of the Buddha, where he hears someone playing a guitar, and then they have a conversation about the tightness of the strings. And the answer to how our attention should be focused is therefore not too tight and not too loose. And this is kind of going across on the scale, this diagonal line of this graph of scaling up, as in reaching further out into the world and seeing the broader patterns of existence, and then also being able to at times scale down and go down into the meditative, more self-examinatory ideas and features of what it is that we're looking at. So that's a basic idea. I hope that you guys were able to capture it in my short presentation there. And that was just to set us up with a language to be talking about this stuff. So I'm going to hand over first now to David, and then we'll take Father Michael from there. So over to you, David. Oh, we can't hear you.
Thanks, Paul. It was a good overview. Okay.
Oh, my phone got locked.
Okay.
Go for it.
I'm looking at all the men here. Okay. So as Paul mentioned, I've been meditating for a while now, off and on for 25 years. And, but very intensely for the past 2 or 3 again. And what I find is taking time every day to meditate. And for me, that means tuning into my experience and observing, coming to the place where I can observe the experience, which sometimes takes a little time to disengage from the combined experience and the observation of it, but sitting in silence allows that separation or that differentiation to take place, so that I can see what's going on in my mind and heart and body. Not only see, but actually experience it. John Vervaeke emphasized the importance of being able to feel the sensations in our body, and from a neuroaffective standpoint, psychological standpoint, the benefit of doing that is that whatever we observe tends to find its natural balance, and the insight into taking time to observe what's going on mentally, emotionally, and physically allows for deeper comprehension, understanding, not only mentally, but at a felt sense standpoint in the body. There's understanding is not only mental; it also includes the experience we have in our body. Understanding, by the definition of the word, is what is under our standing. So what I find is, by doing this every day, the internal noise tends to go down, and my ability to see more clearly and to sense more clearly increases. And as that happens, I can start to see what's going on around me, like in group dynamics. I'm a student of group dynamics, as well as interpersonal dynamics. Or if I'm working in the garden, sensing into the plants and the flowers, and developing a relationship at that level. So it enhances that ability. And that ability to understand in that way, to really tune in and have in a way a communion with the world around me, allows me to be more precise in what I say and do, so that with my overall interest to uplift society, uplift people I'm with, it's important. I found it's important for me to develop a skillfulness in what I say and do, so that it doesn't cause doesn't cause turbulence or unnecessary reaction. Now, one of the things we were talking about in core groups is taking 5 minutes a day to do this as a core group. Some core groups are talking about it, are looking at doing the same practice. Some core groups are talking about doing individual practices, but developing an agreement that we'll do this for 5 minutes a day. And as little revelation here, doing it for 5 minutes a day is not going to give you a terrifically large insight into yourself. It will open a door. This is what I found. It'll open a door to the practice, and that door opens. There's something else that starts to emerge, from a deeper sense of ourselves, a deeper sense of being that is, I find, quite attractive. And so I tend to want to meditate longer. So I'll do 25 or 50 minutes in the morning and 5 to 25 minutes at night. And both these periods allow my internal state to settle and to calm, which at night allows me to go to sleep easier. And in the morning, sets a tone a creative tone for me going out into the day. So I'm not so packed full with lots of different things going on mentally and emotionally. I have a meditation teacher who emphasized that it wasn't the amount of time initially that was important, it was the regularity of time. So, and he said the same time every day for the same period of time. The same time every day helps to create a pattern or a habit. And beginning with 5 minutes a day tends to open up that doorway of perception and the something else that starts to arise. And then what I found is I wanted to add time to that. At first I thought, yeah. Okay, that doesn't make sense to me at all. Just, every day, the emphasis on every day at the same time. But I was surprised to see that it did make a difference. That, for one thing, just sitting down in the same place where I do my meditation, just sitting down, my nervous system goes, it's as if my body says, oh, I've been looking forward to this. And it just goes bujunk. And in a delightful way. So it has had nothing but positive impact on my life, as well as positive impact in terms of knowing myself in deeper ways, being able to observe these deeper emotional and mental states so that I can see them in more and more detail. And the thing about doing this is that when something is observed in more and more detail, the pattern opens up, it unlocks, particularly if it's a compulsive pattern, it tends to unlock and become more fluid and flexible so that it doesn't control us, doesn't control me as much as it used to. And the more I do it, the less compulsion there is behind some of these patterns that I don't like, and I want to gain more insight on. So I recommend it, and particularly as an experiment, not as a should or you have to, but more as an experiment where the curiosity is open-ended, and there's no have-tos involved in this. That's quite important. So thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you, and over to Michael.
Thank you, David. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And for the rest of you guys, listen to what he says. I can affirm absolutely everything that he says, and I have experienced most of the things that he talks about in my own life and in my own practice. While David talks a little more about meditation, I want to talk a little bit more about the other pole that Vervaeke discussed, which is contemplation, theoria, as they say in Greek. And part of the reason that we practice these interior forms of prayer, these interior forms of attention, and sort of this withdrawal from external things and a little more inward focus, it helps to get us grounded. I don't know about you, but for a lot of men nowadays, we live so much in our heads all the time, and we're so busy thinking all the time, and we're so busy, living in virtual reality that we very often forget that we have bodies, until, we try to sit up straight, having been hunched over the computer for hours, and we realize that, our back cracks from our necks to our tailbone, and that we're stiff and we can't move anymore. There's a real sense of loss of physicality. And one of the genuine fundamental marks of masculinity is our physicality. And I think, sort of modern lifestyle sort of militates against that. And anything we can do to get back in touch with our body, be it physical practices, like martial arts. Myself, I pump iron, for those who don't know that. I'm in the gym 6 days a week, just walking the dog, but just to get back in touch with your own body helps to ground you. It helps to recenter ourselves and allows us, not to be simply carried around, by whatever happens to be going on around us. And it's a really important practice. Having said all of that, though, with regards to, to sort of contemplation or meditation, Christian practice has always been a little suspicious of the empty mind. I know that's rather a large thing in Eastern meditation practices, to get to the state of no mind, or not to have one's attention focused on any particular thing. The Christian tradition is always a little suspicious of that, always afraid something unwanted might creep in while we're not paying good attention. And so Christian tradition is also grounded in an idea found in Scripture that we are to pray without ceasing. And so the Christian tradition has looked to find ways of praying all the time, or at least of keeping the attention on God. Now, I'm a Christian, maybe you're not. You call it God, the universe, the divine masculine. I don't know what what you're keeping in touch with. And at this moment, I don't particularly care. But to know that there is something transcendent and bigger than ourselves in the world, and to have some relationship with that, is fundamentally important to us, I think. But how do we do that? Originally, the monks in the desert actually memorized the entire book of 150 Psalms and would recite the Psalms all day long as they prayed. They found that got to be too much. And it was hard to do consistent work when you're trying to remember what the next verse of Psalm 132 was. And so after about a generation, the monks settled on a very simple method of prayer. The $10 word is monologistic, which is a one-word prayer, or a very short prayer. O Lord, make haste to help me, which is a verse from the Psalm. And eventually they settled on a very common Christian prayer, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. And it was slightly expanded into a longer version, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, which is 7 words in Greek and 7 words in Slavonic, and they sort of like that. And so simply the recitation of a very short, simple prayer like that throughout the day allowed the monks to keep God constantly in mind, as well as to be able to function and do whatever job or work they had, that was at hand. And that became the basis of most contemplative prayer in at least in the Eastern Christian tradition. We use a prayer rope. This is sort of an Orthodox rosary. It's made out of wool, and it's knotted, so it doesn't clatter around like sometimes Catholic rosary beads will make noise and they clatter. Ours is very quiet, but simply to the continuous recitation of the Jesus prayer throughout the day is a very common practice in Eastern Christian cultures. And I do it myself. I have parishioners who do it, and it allows us just to keep God in the back of our minds. And the advantages in doing this is that then when we bring the presence of God into any interaction with other people, it helps us to remind ourselves that that person is also in the image of God. That person in front of me has inherent dignity. That person has inherent value, and it changes the way that we interact with each other. And it helps to elevate the other in our eyes and makes for better interactions all the way around. And then not only every interaction with people, but every interaction with things or with the rest of the world is also accompanied with a consciousness that these things all belong to a higher order, and that we can then treat the entire world and everything in it with a greater dignity and a greater respect. So ultimately, for a simple practice that I might recommend, a couple of things. First is simply, again, for those of you with a religious orientation, simply practicing the presence of God. And there's a little book published in English, I'll put it over in the chat for you, by someone called Brother Lawrence. It's simply called that, Practicing the Presence of God. And it's a very simple thing and a very simple method to do, but it has some really nice effects for you. The second practice that I might suggest, and I offer this as a possibility for your core group practices, and that is a principally medieval Latin practice that was perfected by the Benedictines. Is something called Lectio Divina. And what this means is sacred reading. And what you do is you take, in Christian context, a verse is scripture, but it doesn't have to be scripture. I don't care if you're reading the Bhagavad Gita, or if you're reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Find, a brief passage, something short, 1 sentence, 1 paragraph, read that. Read it over again, read it over 2, 3, 4 times, then lay the text aside and simply think about that for a while and find the meaning in it, what's personal, what drew you to the text in the first place, and eventually allow your mind not even to drop the text and simply to abide in kind of an awareness of where that text has taken you. And if you learn to do this with some consistency, you'll find you can start very engaged, very mentally engaged with the text, and a good wrestling with it, and and thinking through it, and all of this. And eventually, once we've kind of worked our way through it, we find that we simply sit kind of in a quiet awareness with the truths that the particular text has led us to. And again, for those in a religious tradition, then start with some kind of scriptural reading eventually leads to a meditation, which eventually leads to a kind of prayer, which puts us back in touch with God. And, again, for people who maybe have trouble just sitting still and not thinking about anything, or, focusing on the candle in front of you, or trying to keep, a consciousness of your breath, perhaps a very simple text, a simple sentence might be a way of allowing us a little bit of mental engagement until we can learn to calm ourselves down a little more. So that's all I'll offer at this point. Back over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Father Michael and David, both for your presentations. Good. Now I'm just going to open the floor for short comments. First of all, from the guys who are core group leaders. And after that, I'll add in also if there's like every group has a group hand. So if I know there's one or two of those guys in here as well. But let's first share if any of you guys have anything you'd like to add.
I think other than David, I'm the only other core team leader here.
Yeah, okay.
So that pretty much makes me it. Yeah, I really appreciate the understanding that John Vervaeke brings of the two aspects, the two poles, the looking up and then looking in. And this practice that we're trying to establish really needs to be an intentional habit to sort of disengage from the daily pace of things, from the distractions that you sort of pointed out there in the beginning of your presentation, Paul. And I sort of think of it as the three S's. Slowing, solitude, silence, and there's almost a progression in that: slowing, solitude, silence. But for me, there really is something quite important in that you need both aspects. You need to be able to look up. So if you're in the religious traditions, the divine, perhaps also the idea, if you're not in a religious tradition, the wonders and glories of nature. But even the philosophical tradition, Plato sort of said, you should think on the big things, the big ideas: goodness, virtue, truth, justice. So there is this need to look at something bigger and greater and consider with attention. And then having done that, to look in and to examine ourselves. And of course, that idea of the examined life is not worth living. So it's not just the examination of one's own life, but an examination of our life in the light of the bigger picture. And we find then almost an applied contemplation where we can examine our strengths and our weaknesses, those things that we need to work on, those things that are beneficial for us, those things that aren't, and then produce some form of application from that and develop in a more intentional way. Perhaps then sort of the normal practice is. That's really just my sort of quick thoughts on those things.
Thanks, Alex. Much appreciated. I'm going to look first. Marty, Bolo, I know you guys are both team hands.
Sure, I can go. I think that like in my 20s, I would read a lot about meditation, and I had some attempts to have a regular practice, and every time I started, after a couple of weeks or maybe 2 months, I would drop it or get distracted and forget about it. And I think like what really changed the situation and made me stick to the practice is going for regular retreats, and either just going on my own into nature and spending there a night, or for some sort of organized retreat, which is organized about meditation or men's work. And these retreats always reinforce my commitment to practice, and I always come back from them and I'm like, yes, I want to keep the practice. It's important and I want to do it. So I think for me, it's quite crucial to go like once a year at least for some sort of a retreat, or half a year. And second thing, which is also helpful for me to keep the discipline, is being the part of the core. It's like that's one of my daily habits, and that's what I have to every week refer to the guys in core, and it also helps me to keep it going.
Yeah. Thanks, Paulo.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Certainly necessary for me as well to have my daily buddy calls to make sure I stick with my stuff. Good. Okay, guys, I'm going to make 4 breakout rooms. I
think Marty might want to say something too.
Yeah.
Did you have something, Marty?
Yeah, I could add something, but
Yeah,
my
go for
mic
it.
was
Sorry.
still muted there. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of things going on in my life, so I was a little bit late. Sorry for that. So I didn't catch the total presentation of you, Paul, but I got a little bit of it, and neither of Father Michael. And I can give my perspective, like what I really like about going inwards and going outwards, and to feel that. And for me, it's really a kind of way of starting the day, instead of just rushing into the day, that I reflect on myself. Who am I, and what do I have to manifest in this life with this system, and how can I do that? So come back to myself. What is it that I want to do, instead of being there, just feel what is right. And the other thing is, and how does that be in contact with the total universe, and how is that a holistic way of being there for the whole community, for the whole system, for everything that there is, and how can I be guided by everything there is? And like Father Michael said, is it a God? In my feeling, I really feel my ancestors supporting me in what I have to do here. And my practice is daily the 5 Tibetans. I always have problems with the English version of that. And there are all kind of movements, and all the time I feel, okay, I'm coming close to myself. And how is that in the big? Come close to myself. And those two give a really good reflection of how to put it into the world, and being in contact with yourself and with the greater good. And I can imagine that is really important to state, like, how do we do that, instead of just being there for what you really want as a result? How can you be in contact with yourself and for the greater good of the whole community? So that's what I would like to add to this point.
Thanks, Marty. Yeah, great. Yeah, I think for me, certainly, I just spoke to Jonathan Vervaeke. I don't know if anybody managed to see the podcast that came out this morning, but one of the things he said right early on in the conversation is like, when you start your practice, then all the weird stuff that happens. And so I was like, oh, what's the weird stuff? And I think there's something like, you connect to that, like, life is far more amazing than what we think it is, and what, like, our culture sometimes makes it out to be. So it's an exciting journey to go on, and one that's full of mystery, I think. Good.
And to surrender into the not knowing and into the mystery. That is what is asked from you.
Yeah.
Okay. Aho.
Good. Guys, I've set up 4 groups. So I'm going to put us all, I think we're going to be about 4 guys in each group. And we have, I think we're going to let's take 25 minutes to share in there. So we'll say 1:15, we'll come back. The questions that I'm going to give you to answer inside the groups, and I encourage you to try and share as much as possible so every man has an opportunity to speak. But the first question I want us to share is, what are you personally doing as your current personal practice? If you feel that you can explain that very shortly and quickly, then you can also share what you have learned so far. The last question, I'd like to save it as much as possible for the conversation afterwards, but you can start going to that conversation if you get through all the 4 guys and you feel that that's ready. Maybe some of you really feel like you have something you want to offer on that. But the last question is, how can we begin to create shared guidelines for our community as well? And so this means for the broader men's work community as well, obviously concretely in Manifesto, but also in men's work. So what are you personally doing right now? What have you learned? And how can we begin to share create shared guidelines for our community. Any questions before I send you guys out into breakout rooms? And there's going to be Father Michael, David, Alex, and myself leading the 4 rooms. Good. Okay. There we go. We'll be back here at 1:15. Thank you, guys, and sorry for all rudely interrupting you all right in the middle. Good that we got to, you finished off your sharing there, Krista. So yeah, I'd love to hear from, we had a great discussion in ours. We had some just great to hear, like, guys, really different places doing really different types of stuff. And then also noticing some desire for structure. Like, we hate structure. We can't stand it when people tell us what to do, but there's also something that we need structure in our lives to be able to create a powerful foundation and direction. So there's this constant battle between these two things. So I'd like to hear from the 3 other groups as well before I take over. And then we'll see if there's some space for open comments and questions.
Well, I'll start then. Our group went quite deep and moved from the practicing to really work with the fear of being part of the Walking Dead to much more awareness, and particularly the movement from the constructed sense of self into a more genuine sense of self, and characterized by humility and trust, surrender, as compared to trying to make something happen, and the desire to let go of the constructed sense of self, or commonly called the ego, in favor of actual experience of our core of who we are. A lot of learning along those lines. So,
anyone else from David's group who wants to add to that? Letting go of the constructed sense of self to get in touch with who we really are.
I think like it was really interesting to see. We haven't spoken. I don't know if I've ever spoken to these men before or met them, but we were quite aligned. It felt like we were quite aligned. We could understand the feed that we created in that space. Yeah, even my cat participated in the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can sometimes just, when we've set an intentional agenda, how much we can get out of having these kinds of conversations. Being in community, which has these shared values of going deep with each other, seems to really do something. Krista, let's hear from you.
I just want to throw in a fun little twist of the plot. As opposed to who we are, I'd love to add what, because the who implies a person, it implies a human. But when looking closely, we'll see that the presence that is here as
is lacking some IT connection.
Yeah, genderless, colorless, etc. So I'd love to change the who to what, because the who fucks us up and keeps us in personality. What am I, not who?
Thanks, Krista. Good. Any other comments from David's group? Good. Then let's hear Father Michael.
Yeah, no, my cat is being a distraction and is not contributing anything at all. He's in the windowsill behind my monitor, and he keeps opening the curtain and letting sunlight in. So if I wince now and again, that's the reason why, and I can't get him out. Yes, we also had very divergent practices in our group, which I expected, and which is all good, but everyone had one.
Yeah.
And which, is encouraging, even if it was something minimal and wasn't, as faithfully and diligently kept as he would like. Nevertheless, he had a practice. and he recognized the value in it, and even had some additional more physical or embodied practices that he found were more useful to him than kind of sitting and trying to keep track of his breath. So he found something that worked for him, and it's all good. And by way of a practical approach that might be helpful to the core groups, Matthias had a book that had some practice in it. Matthias, would you speak to that, please, and share the title of the book and briefly what the approach was?
Sure. So last month's evolution in the Swedish online group, we have been studying the miracle morning, and that's the practice of 6 habits called life savers. And what I find with these that they are quite wide. There's a lot of opportunity how to attack these 6 habits, but there seem to be the 6 habits that come over and over again, no matter kind of what tradition you come from and what philosophy or what kind of personal development place you're coming from. Mm-hmm. And what also I see with men is that a lot of men actually have strengths with one of these 6 habits. So it's easy to fall into the momentum instead of like, I have to struggle to get up because meditation is really hard for me. One of these, every man probably is more or less a master of. And then to add another strength from a place of already momentum is way easier, it seems to be, than to start from zero. Like build momentum from momentum. And so these habits are silence, they are affirmation, kind of self-designed prayer, and they are visualization. And what I see there is to embody in the moment the being that I am to become, to really feel and collapse the illusion of time and space horizon. And then we have exercise, and then we have reading and scribing. Mm-hmm. So these 6 are all really powerful in the point of getting to know thyself. So it can be included the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual in one practice from 6 minutes a day. So with the men that went through this the past month, a lot of men really experienced a huge boost, but still most men already were doing 1, 2, 3, and some even 6 of these practices. So that's a really good standard. And we're looking to actually change from kind of the battle plan. I don't know what you guys calling it in Manifesto, but that kind of design to have this as the very, very foundation. And then when this sits, then you can add the battle plan. But if you don't have these 6 practices, it's way harder to achieve a battle plan or actually these other kind of goals.
There you go.
Thanks, Matthias. Yeah, Matthias is also running a network of online groups, especially in Swedish, I think. I think certainly we actually just, when you start a manifesto, you just need one thing. And we felt like sometimes 6 is a lot. Just getting one clear thing is one priority. But absolutely, and there's a lot of the time, what this makes me think of, Matthias, is just like we can really overthink these things and go diving down into the philosophy of things. And as Europeans, when I talk to the Americans, right, I just notice how sometimes we kind of get caught up in all the convoluted thinking about stuff, and sometimes it's about just grabbing something new and going for it. If it makes sense, then try it out, and action is what changes everything. And that's what sometimes I kind of whatever is at hand and seems good, then it can be good for move forward with that when it comes to contemplative practices, instead of trying to get it perfect from the start.
If I can add, I would add one more aspect.
Yeah.
And that is above the meditation and contemplation, we also use a tool we call the fact map. Because to know thyself, I need to know where I'm at in the different areas of life. So we do this kind of practice of a bunch of questions, different number of questions depending on the depth you're working in. But say you would have 10 questions on each of the P's you're working with. It's like, where are you at when it comes to the people with friends, depth of communication with your wife and sex life, or, and grade these where you think you're at right now from a level of 1 to 10.
Thanks, and Matthias, I'm going to cut you off there because we have very little time left. I want to hear from the third group. So Alex, let's give it over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, like Father Michael and I'm sure David experienced, the men in the team all seem to have been long-time practitioners of contemplation and meditation. What was really interesting for me was it seems to be embedded in the morning routine and then connected to physical activity, so exercise of some sort, which is really brilliant. And then the other thing that really stood out for me was the fact that there was real world benefits. So your mental well-being, physical well-being, psychological well-being, emotional well-being, there's some real important things there. And then the other thing is, in terms of guidelines, is to focus on creating the framework to instill the discipline to practice, rather than to tell men what to do and how to do it.
Thanks, Alex.
Mm.
Anyone else from Alex's group who has something to add to that?
Mm.
Okay.
I think that we were very much in agreement that the most effective is to do your practice before anything else in the morning. So before looking at the screen, before working, before eating breakfast. And I think that probably most of us would agree, and that could be one of the starting points for building the guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's that. Yeah, that sounds like a valuable input to me. And if there's not too much resistance, I think I also find that not looking at my screen for quite some time before I go to bed at night is incredibly good for me and really helps my sleep to work better. There was one guy in our group who lit a candle every evening before he went to bed and wasn't using electric light even, which that also sounds like a really peaceful and good thing. So things like that seem good. Okay, so guys, we also had a great discussion in our group, and we dived into this question quite well about like how to create common guidelines, and I think I'm kind of facing something of a paradox, which I touched on with what Matthias was saying about like just starting with something. What I had great conversation with John Vervaeke, and every time I listen to his work, I get far deeper in my understanding of what it means to contemplate existence. And I've also, when I look at John Vervaeke's, meditation courses, then what I see is, and this is what John Vervaeke said right at the beginning of our video, and it's the main conclusion of our conversation, is that you can't come at these things just being outside of the traditions. You have to first understand how you relate to the different traditions before you go into this kind of work. And so, when I look at John Vervaeke's meditation course, then, he's really, everything is infused with Buddhism as well. And that's great for people. And he's very clear about what he's offering as well. I realize, like, if I'm going to go deeper and deeper in teaching people about, doing practice, then I'm probably going to be continuously pointing towards my belief system as well. And so each of us kind of do this in the way that we present things to the world. And I think the idea that we can do this in a neutral way is very, very difficult. And so one of the ideas that we ended up on in our conversation is, are there some kind of lower level practices that we can engage with in Manifesto that can be very, very good? And there was two things that I touched on, and we didn't conclude on it really, but it was like an interesting idea, was the idea of journaling. I think journaling is a very, very strong basic practice that can do both looking upwards and looking downwards, that it can really contain both of those approaches, and it suits our kind of meditative mind. And I love journaling by writing on paper because it just gets me away from my screen a lot. So I think that's kind of like a connection back to old school stuff as well. So I'm not saying like this is what we're going to do. This is just referring to a conversation we had, and then something about the remembrance of death, which I think is universal. Something about that, and I don't really know how to bring that in a clear and constructive way either. But I think the remembrance of death could be a powerful tool that we can refer to in this work as well. Good. So guys, we have 1 minute left. I want to end on time. We try and keep these frameworks tight. Jonathan Vervaeke has said yes to joining us for our next conversation. So I think I'm going to ask Jonathan Peugeot if he would like to come on as well. Maybe we'll have them separately, maybe we'll have them at the same time, we'll see. But that will be fun. And I think that we're going to continue this for at least a couple of weeks, if not a month, and see where we end up. So I really appreciate all of you guys coming in and contributing and sharing here. Please tell us how we could do this better, because it's the first time we're doing it. Was I too strict? Was there too much structure? Was it too loose and open? What could be better? We really want to improve these conversations to make sure that we're doing it, and continue this discussion on the Manifesto Google group. That's the place to do it. If you're not a member of the Google group, then you know, ask me, and I'll let you. We can get you in there. But that's where I want to have the larger conversation if anybody has more things they want to discuss. So thank you very much, everybody. Great to see you all, and have a continued good evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.